Good evening and welcome to ET Now Startup Central, India's first and only daily show dedicated to startups, technology and entrepreneurs. I'm Chandra Shrikant coming to you live from India's startup capital, Bengaluru. We keep it with the big verdict yesterday, Aadhaar, because the repercussions are still being felt by sectors as diverse as banking to financial services to telecom to fintech startups. But we start off with a big voice on the show. DOT Secretary Aruna Sundararajan has reacted to the Aadhaar verdict for the first time. She spoke to my colleague Parisha on what the roadmap will be as far as telcos are concerned, because remember, eKYC was used as the primary way of onboarding for many of these telcos, bringing down their cost of customer acquisition. What is the roadmap going to be, considering the Supreme Court has barred private entities from using eKYC? Hear out what she had to say.
See, first of all, we will have to ensure that in the coming days we become completely compliant with what the Supreme Court has said in terms of data not being stored beyond a certain period, about private agencies not being able to or not using the Aadhaar database. So we'll have to get compliant. So for that we'll be sitting down with the UID as well as with the law ministry to see how to get it compliant. And after that we will have to see going forward what is the way, because how do we ensure that the eKYCs etc., which had been done in a certain way with Aadhaar, how do we whether there's any alternate that is possible without using the Aadhaar database.
Okay, so Aruna Sundararajan saying that they will sit down with UIDAI to figure out the way forward. But there is also a lot of confusion in the startup universe, particularly for fintech startups, those that were lending based on Aadhaar records, those that were using Aadhaar-based eKYC to onboard customers faster. What's the roadmap there going to be? We have two special guests joining us to decode the impact as far as startups are concerned. Nikhil Kumar, a payment expert, he was with iSprit before, someone who played a very important role in giving India the Bheem UPI app. We also have Harshal Mathur, the co-founder and CEO of Razorpay, a fintech startup based right here in Bengaluru. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on Startup Central. Nikhil, I'm going to come to you, and clearly there's still a lot of confusion on what the SE's order on Section 57 means. Some people are interpreting this as a complete bar as far as private entities are concerned. You've had a different view, saying that, perhaps it just means that it's going to be voluntary. How should we read this at this point? Or should we await more clarity from agencies such as NPCI or the RBI?
Chandra, let me start by clarifying that no access for KYC and auth have been shut down. All the private companies which have access to Aadhaar continue to get access to KYC and auth services. So this basically what the judgment really says is that access to authentication services will be prohibited to a certain set of entities. So if you look at this, the action is now upon UIDAI to decide who will have access. Now, when the government is saying that this access will be provided when backed by a law, so now it's important that RBI, SEBI, IRDA, PF, and many other institutions who are the sectoral regulators, including TRAI and others, have to now come together and clarify if they are allowed to if they can allow private entities to accept Aadhaar as a voluntary mode of authentication, given the authority that has been given to them by constitutional law. It could be something like a SEBI Act, it could be PMLA, it could be IT Act, and so on and so forth. So I think for the common man at this point of time, there is no change. The only way to read the judgment as a common person is to say, if you're getting any of those pesky calls from your bank or telecom operator, you don't need to worry about it anymore.
Right. Harshal, would you agree with this? I mean, is the onus completely with UIDAI to now clarify, or, are their hands tied as well? Because a lot of people are reading this as an explicit bar on private entities as far as Section 57 is concerned. So even if a customer wants to do it voluntarily, the private entities may not want to do anything now to do with Aadhaar. They will wait for clarity, or they will wait for some sort of a judicial backing before they can go ahead. How would you really read this?
I would want to agree with Nikhil. As a fintech company, we would prefer to read the law the way Nikhil is interpreting it. But right now, the way I look at it, there's a lot of confusion. There's a segment, if you look at the judgment, it kind of says that private entities should not touch Aadhaar, but it also says that if you have legal backing, you are allowed to. Now, what kind of legal backing is allowed and what kind of legal backing is not allowed, that's still a question in the air. I think the way we are looking at it is we'll still wait for UIDI to and RBI to come up with specific guidelines on what sectors are allowed to use Aadhaar authentication and what is the way that we should continue to. So far, the way we have been running, even before the judgment came out, most of the companies like us were offering both options. That is eKYC via Aadhaar or via physical KYC and leave the choice to the customer. The way we look at the judgment today, we still continue to offer both options and let the customer take the decision whether he wants to voluntarily give Aadhaar and go via easier way of doing eKYC, or he wants to submit additional documents and go through the full physical KYC process. The full physical KYC process takes a little bit more time, it's a little bit more cumbersome. So most customers, even today, when given both choices, are opting for Aadhaar KYC. But yeah, we'll wait for the actual guidance to come out whether this is allowed going forward or even this is not allowed. If that is the case, that will change the cost dynamics a lot for fintech companies like us.
Right. Nikhil, the other point I wanted to ask you was, what will this mean for all the initiatives that the NPCI itself has been pushing, leveraging Aadhaar? Will NPCI be seen as a private entity, and thus will its wings itself be clipped as a result of this judgment? Because it's been pioneering, many initiatives leveraging Aadhaar, using Aadhaar. So what will this mean for NPCI and the various initiatives that it has been championing? Will it be considered a private entity?
Yeah, I mean, by definition, obviously, NPCI is a Section 25 company. So obviously, parts of the law will apply to them, or the verdict will apply to them. But just to clarify, NPCI uses Aadhaar in various different ways, and they don't use it in all those products and the schemes that they operate. For example, RuPay doesn't require Aadhaar, IMPS doesn't require Aadhaar, or the UPI, which is the payment system, also doesn't require Aadhaar. There are two primary places where Aadhaar is used by NPCI. One is Aadhaar is used as a payment address in what's known as the Aadhaar Payments Bridge, which allows the direct beneficiary transfer to happen. So I don't see any challenge being there at all, because social welfare and DBT there has been no recommendation on cutting down any of those services. So DBT will definitely be allowed to happen. So Aadhaar is a payment bridge for people to receive their benefits into the bank account. I don't see any challenge being there. On the second part, where Aadhaar enabled payment system, where NPCI leverages the Aadhaar authentication infrastructure to allow people to put money or withdraw money in extremely rural areas of the country, where through what's known as the business correspondents, by providing micro ATM services. So that's where the real challenge is. Now, in my opinion, I think the judgment is also very clear about using Aadhaar for social welfare. And I think the services provided by NPCI will be seen in that light. I don't think you, Harshil, or I have ever had the need to use a micro ATM, because we are all privileged people. We have ATMs in every other street where we live. But this is not the case in India largely. There are over 2.5 lakh business correspondents who offer banking services based on the Aadhaar authentication infrastructure. I don't think the intention of the Supreme Court is to take away the financial inclusion mission that the country is set on. So I'm quite hopeful that there will be no impact much on NPCI services. The other service which NPCI offers, which is known as the eNAT service, also uses the Aadhaar infrastructure. However, the eNAT service is covered under eSign, which derives its power from the IT Act, which is already backed by the law. So I don't see any challenge on eNAT, but I'm hoping that NPCI will also clarify this very soon. But I don't see any disruption of services yet, as of yet, for anybody in the industry.
Right. Harshal, in terms of the way forward, are fintech startups now in a wait and watch mode? Have you got any sense from RBI or NPCI on, when you can get some clarity as far as some of what these sections will mean, the read down sections will mean after the Aadhaar verdict yesterday?
Right now, I think at least one thing is certain, that the constitutional validity that Aadhaar has got, we know that Aadhaar is here to stay. So a lot of things have got clarified. We know what certain things that we can do and certain things we can't do. But at specific sectoral guidelines, we'll wait for the sectoral regulators to come up with it. There are certain issues as well that come up because things like bank account is not mandated to link with Aadhaar anymore. So a lot of things relied on that, like ENAS that he was talking about. It relied on the bank account being linked with Aadhaar. If the bank account itself is not linked with Aadhaar, the ENACH and eSign process, even though it's available, it will not work for a lot of customers who have not linked their bank account with Aadhaar. So a lot of services will rely on linking Aadhaar to things like bank account or things like mobiles. Those services will also be affected, even though the core service itself, like eSign, continue to work. So overall, there will be some impact in certain instruments that we use today. And we're already evaluating what are the alternatives available. We're talking to the bankers as well as folks in RBI to understand what are the alternatives that they're going to come up with in the absence of Aadhaar available for these services. But right now, it is a wait and watch approach. We'll have to wait for sectoral regulators to come up with guidelines.
Right, right. I'm going to end with one final question for Nikhil. Nikhil, this is a little technical, but there are questions on what impacts writing down Section 57 will have. Some people say that it will have no impact in the private sector using Aadhaar authentication or eKYC services, because the right to use Aadhaar comes not from Section 57, but from Section 8 and Section 2U of the Aadhaar Act. But, even if that were true legally, if you look at the tone of the judgment, it's very clear that, the judges have taken an adverse view on private entities accessing Aadhaar. So, though it's backed by the Aadhaar Act, will we actually see companies or regulators using this Section 8 read with 2U, or will they await a fresh, legal provision from the government? Just, simplify this for us in terms of the way forward.
Yeah, so Chandra, if you look at the judgment, basically throughout the judgment, the judges don't seem to have found any problem with voluntary use of Aadhaar anywhere at all. If at all, if they've taken an adverse view, the sentiment of the judgment basically says that, look, there is no need to use Aadhaar where it's not required. So that's basically what they've said by saying don't make it mandatory for linking to bank, to your mobile. So similarly, the adverse view is only related to places where you need to do your authentication just purely by the basis of a contract. And since it's just basis on a contract, there is no way to prosecute, or they can't provide you any sort of grievance. So the view of the Supreme Court basically is that, look, you can continue to use Aadhaar, but as far as it's needed and it's backed by a regulated or regulation or a law. In fact, they don't even specifically restrict any regulator from making it mandatory for any sorts of services. The judgment is only in the light of saying that you can't make it mandatory for existing bank accounts and existing phone numbers. So there is no mention about any restriction on opening new accounts if used voluntarily. The second point I want to make and close the debate is look, it's important that the judgment starts with a statement saying Aadhaar is an inclusion tool. So if the government or if the court order is interpreted as to say that no private entity will get access, so what this means is 1.2 billion people who never had access to certain types of services, whether it be access to credit, access to new savings products like mutual funds or new insurance products, will now be cut access because of the fact that they can't use Aadhaar, which again goes against the inclusion argument. So if you really look at the judgment, their view of the judgment starts with to say that
Right.
Aadhaar is a socially empowering tool, it's a welfare tool. So I don't think that there
Right.
will be restriction
Right.
in the case of financial inclusion or health inclusion, or even the case of improving skills in the country.
Right, Nikhil. Right. I mean, it's almost, 1,500 page order. So I think there will be more and more nuances, debates and counterpoints. But I think we will await more clarity from regulatory agencies, the government itself on how it plans to go the way forward. And, what companies themselves will do. Will they, go ahead? Can they not do it at all? There are still many doubts. But thank you so much, Nikhil and Harshal, for weighing in on this edition of Startup Center. Let's take a break at this point, but when we come back, we have another big voice on the show. Make My Trip's founder and group CEO Deep Kalra talks about the Aadhaar Verdict, data protection law and more. Welcome back to ED Now Startup Central. As promised, another big voice on the show. We have Deep Kalra, the group CEO and founder of Make My Trip. He spoke to my colleague Parisha Tyagi on the Aadhaar judgment yesterday, the import of what it means and the need to bring in a data protection law soon. Listen into what he had to say.
I do understand that private companies can still use Aadhaar. It's not mandatory. So we use Aadhaar, and we are using Aadhaar as a mean of authentication, which I think is very important for online payments. And in fact, we've just launched online lending, and again we're using Aadhaar. So we continue to use it. I know it's not compulsory or mandatory, but we think it was a very major development. It was one of the largest ever movements at a government platform of social identification, probably the largest ever. And over 1 billion people now signed up. I think it's going to be very valuable going forward. We would still like to keep using it.
So, sir, when you talk about Aadhaar usage, another important issue that comes into question is that of data security. So, how do you go about data security? How do you ensure that the user's data is secure and safe enough?
Well, being a large online platform like Make My Trip, we have to treat data securely, and we are also one of the oldest e-commerce platforms for travel. We've always kept data only in an encrypted manner. There's no other way. I think India took a very seminal step in two-factor authentication, which changed the whole game and made it far more secure. And we continue. We've had touch wood, no data breach, and we continue to be very careful. And I think you can never be good enough. There are oftentimes breaches made every day, as you know, on.
Okay, we told you about the Flipkart sale last week, and it looks like Amazon's kicked off its great Indian sale as well. So intense competition expected in October. So look out for some exciting deals on Amazon, Flipkart, and I think Paytm is going to come up with something as well. So Amazon's Diwali sale starts off between October 10 to October 15. Prime members will get early access. Some of the biggest deals are on smartphones, large appliances and fashion. They are also giving a 10% instant discount for SBI cards. They're also planning to launch 3 new Echo devices as part of the festive sale. There you have it. Details on the Amazon Great Indian Sale. We'll have to wait and see if Walmart-owned Flipkart will yet again beat Amazon this time in the festive season, because they've claimed that they've always had an edge as far as their Big Billion Day sale is concerned. But on that note, completely out of time in this edition of ET Now Startup Central. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned to ET Now for a special show coming up.